Sadly, I think the actions are very good for the price of gold, not so good for the countries. If you look at your country, your prime minister believes that the budget will balance itself. Meanwhile, he doesn't believe that there's a business case for Canadian natural gas, despite the fact that his customers do. This type of narrative stupidity, sadly, is good for gold. If you look at my country, I mean, I need to say, this will piss off a lot of your viewers. I won't vote for any of the Three Stooges. Not for Kennedy, not for Trump, not for Harris. All of them are basically trying to bribe voters with their own money. And the victim is, of course, the unborn. They build up debts when they need to. They engage in quantitative easing, which if you did it would be called counterfeiting. All of that is good for gold. Gold does well when investors are concerned about the maintenance of their purchasing power in fiat currency denominated issuers. People in Canada and people in the United States who aren't concerned about the performance of fiat denominated instruments are people who aren't paying attention. I would take issue with one thing you said, Jimmy, which is to say that gold is up this year. I began systematic buying of gold again in 1998. That was a little early, 2 years early to be exact. But gold since 2000, that is to say in this century, is up about 8.5% compounded a year for 24 years. Gold for me has done exactly what I wanted it to. There's a subset of speculators that owns gold not because they're afraid, but because they're hoping that gold is going to repeat its performance of the 70s or its performance 2000 to 2010. That is, they're looking for a hyperbolic move. But I would suggest that in the context of investors with a sense of history, a millennium of history, that gold is doing and has done precisely what you would want it to do. I'm afraid that the rate of appreciation is going to increase. I say afraid because crises in confidence, particularly deserved crises in confidence, which I think we're having in the United States and Canada, disrupt the rest of your life. I would prefer that my gold holdings went down in price and the security around the rest of my life increased. But that's not on offer in a politicized world like we live in.
With the US facing an eye-watering $140 trillion in combined liabilities and unfunded entitlements, Rick Rule paints a stark picture of where our economy might be headed. He draws a chilling parallel to the 1970s, when, to escape overwhelming debt, the government resorted to inflating away the value of the dollar, erasing 85% of its purchasing power in just a decade. During that time, gold soared from $35 to $850 an ounce, protecting those who understood the storm ahead. Today, Rule sees similar warning signs as the government continues to pile on debt and engage in what he calls counterfeiting through quantitative easing. He doesn't own gold because he expects it to hit $2,600. He owns it because he's concerned it could surge to $9,000 or $10,000 as the economy buckles under its own weight.
There is a real difference between narrative and arithmetic. That people argue over what the money should be spent on. They never seem to argue about leaving the money with the people who earned it to begin with. But the numbers that you mention, the 35 trillion, as ugly as that number is, isn't the real problem. The real problem is the net present value of unfunded liabilities around entitlements. Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, military pensions, government pensions. That number, by the most conservative estimate out there, which is the Congressional Budget Office, exceeds $100 trillion. And that number is increasing between 4.5% and 5% compounded every year. We are not paying down those obligations. They are going to have to be rescheduled. If you look at our aggregate debt, which is to say the unfunded liabilities plus the on-balance sheet liabilities, that number is $140 trillion, less $6 trillion on the Fed's balance sheet, itself a product of counterfeiting, quantitative easing. And as you say, we aren't servicing the on-balance sheet liability or the off-balance sheet liability. In fact, the aggregate increase in those liabilities is in excess of $6 trillion a year. Now, it's fashionable in both your country and my country to say tax the rich, make it go away by taxing the rich. It's interesting to note in the United States that the aggregate net worth of American billionaires is $5.6 trillion. That's enough to handle the deficit for 2 years. It absolutely, positively doesn't matter. What's his name? Bernie has suggested that minor revisions of the tax code could raise $5 billion over 10 years in an economy where the deficit exceeds $6 trillion a year. The problem is not revenue. The problem is spending. And nobody on either side of the border seems to care about it. What is the way out? The way out is inflating away the net present value of the obligations, just exactly what the United States did in the decade of the 70s. They reduced the purchasing power of the US dollar by 85% over 10 years. Gold, of course, ran from $35 an ounce to $850 an ounce. There is no other way out. Save a global depression and a renunciation of the debt. Those are the two choices. I think the former is more likely than the latter. There are so many variables, I don't have targets. I'll tell you this. I don't own gold because I thought it would go to 2,600 or 2,700. I own gold because I'm afraid it'll go to $9,000 or $10,000. That's why I own it. And I legitimately, Jimmy, hope I'm wrong. I legitimately hope that my concerns are somehow misplaced and that the price of gold goes down. I'm not one of those who subscribes to the world's going to end on Thursday. Here's how you can profit. There's no part of my makeup that's there. And so while I don't have a price target, I do have a feeling that gold helps me sleep nights and stay calm. And at 71, those are great attributes. I don't pay much attention to the top of the Fed, which is highly politicized. I'm in contact with some of the lower ranked employees of the Fed. Some of them are my subscribers, and I converse with them regularly. And it's been eye opening. I had a very low opinion of them, and I found out I'm wrong. They're well meaning and well informed people. The bias of the employees of the Fed is to keep interest rates high. They see themselves as the only guardian against the destruction of the US dollar by the political class. They don't think, and I think they're right, that the executive or Congress has any interest in controlling spending. And they think that artificially low interest rates will bring about the demise of the dollar faster than it needs to occur. Powell is between a rock and a hard place. The right thing for him to do is to keep interest rates high. The political pressure on him to do otherwise is overwhelming. When he cracks, I don't know, but I think that there's at least a 90% probability that he does crack. If he cracks, then I think past is prologue. And when I say past is prologue, I remember the first part of the decade of the 70s, when inflation in the gold price in the period 1970 to 1971 went up. In 1975, the Fed decided to raise interest rates. When they raised interest rates, the gold price fell by half. It went from $200 an ounce to $100 an ounce. At the end of 1975, they lost their nerve and lowered interest rates. And you had a ramp in the gold price from $100 an ounce to $850 an ounce. If the Fed capitulates, if the political class makes them capitulate, then I'm afraid gold is really truly off to the races.
Thanks for watching today's deep dive into Rick Rule's insights on the US economy and the critical role of gold. To recap, Rule highlighted the staggering $140 trillion in combined liabilities and the government's alarming reliance on inflation to manage debt, a strategy that could lead to another explosive rise in gold prices, just like in the 1970s. He also expressed his concern that the political pressure on the Federal Reserve could lead to a repeat of past mistakes, potentially driving gold to unprecedented levels. If today's discussion got you thinking about your financial strategy, or if you have any thoughts on what we covered, I'd love to hear from you in the comments section below. And if you found this video valuable, don't forget to hit that like button. share it with others who might benefit, and subscribe to stay updated on all things finance and macroeconomics.